focusing more on commentary than on text. We did substantial portion of chapter 5, Parak last Tuesday, and there's a lot of commentary we need to do on that. For example, the relationship of David HaMelech with blind and lame people. If you just look at the substance, if you just look at the text, there's a lot of question marks on that. When you learn it with commentary, it takes on a whole different meaning and an understanding. So that's part of where we're going to go. And we're also going to look at a lot more. So kind of be ready today and next and the following class will be more midrashim and commentaries that really flesh out what we were learning. So let's very briefly to review or summarize what we've done already in Parak chapter 5. David is now accepted as the king of all 12 tribes, or as the text says, of all of Israel and Yehuda. Why separating Yehuda from the rest? Because he already had been the king of Yehuda, Judah. And now he's also being made the king and accepted by all the other tribes. So he's now the king of Israel. All the Zakanim, all the elders come and bless that kingship, that monarchy, and he's anointed a second time. He's already been anointed privately by the word and command of God through the hands of Shmuel Hanavi, prophet Samuel, in secret, because otherwise King Saul might have killed Samuel, not to mention David. Now there's a public anointing. Shmuel already has passed away, but the Zakanim, the elders, anoint him publicly. And so he moves his capital from Hebron to Yerushalayim, Jerusalem, where he's going to reign for 40 years. In all he reigns 40 years, 7 years in Hebron and 33 years in Yerushalayim. Technically 40 and a half years, but the text, one place shows it's a half, the other place they skip the half. So his main capital is Yerushalayim. And then we learn that he starts to take control. There is one Canaanite nation that has not been cleaned out. From the time of Yehoshua, when the Jews came in under Joshua, one by one, the Jews knocked out most of the 7 nations, as they were commanded in chapter 20, Parak of Sefer Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy. They were commanded to wipe out the 7 nations, the Canaanite nations, the Chivi and the Prizi, the Yevusi, the Girgashi, the Chiti, the Amori, the Canaani, and they did wipe out most of them. But for some reason that we remain puzzled going into tonight, the Yevusi, the Jebusites, had never been cleared out. And they were based in Jerusalem. And we discussed it and had a class questions at the end. Why were the Yevusi still there? Why wasn't everyone else cleared out? And I even mentioned it displeased God very much that they had not been cleared out. But tonight we're going to learn why they were not cleared out till now. So we learned last week on the surface that had to be dealt with, and God did, and David did clear them out. They sent him an ultimatum, basically, ultimatum. They said to him, we're not leaving, and we're not letting you displace us. The chances of you getting us out of here are like the chances of you getting out every blind and lame person in the city. You'll never be able to get out every blind and lame person. How do you know who they are? Maybe some of them you see in the open, but the odds of your clearing us out are equivalent to clearing out all the blind and lame people. And David cleared everybody up. And the text tells us a little bit mysteriously, or what's that all about, that he did not want to let blind and lame people ever again back into Jerusalem. They were Snuei David. They were hated by, or they were not. They were hated by as Sinah. It seems to say they were hated by David, blind and lame people, and they're not going to be in my capital. So what's that about? Is that about some kind of like an arrogance that I'm going to have this ultra beautiful capital that everybody in the world is going to say, wow, look at this guy's country and his capital. He's really got something. And I went to visit his capital on vacation. It's an amazing place and it's beautiful. You know, they don't even have a single blind or lame person. It's unbelievable. It's like everybody's got to be a model, a physical fitness buff in order to be in that city. Is that what it was about? Or was it something deeper? There was something much deeper. So we learned about that. And then we learned about his alliance with King Hiram of Tyre, Tsor, in Lebanon. And for some incredible reason, the text doesn't really make clear, King Hiram was an incredible ally of David. And I taught you in class last week that that alliance would continue after David's passing. Hiram would continue as an ally of Solomon, King Shlomo. And he provided cedars from Lebanon. Lebanon, they grow cedars. And he provided cedars to Israel and carpenters to help shape and cut and shape the cedars. And he provided stonework and stonemasons for David to build the walls of Jerusalem. David did not have the opportunity. God did not want him building the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple. Only his son could build it. There are different rabbinical discussions. Why is it that God did not want David to build the Holy Temple? One opinion is because he had blood on his hands, having killed Goliath, and then in later wars. And even though those were justified killings, necessary killings to save the Jewish people, still he had blood on his hands, and it was not appropriate, according to one rabbinic opinion, that the person who would build the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple, would be someone who had blood on his hands. The other opinion goes the other way, that he was so holy, so unique, the progenitor of Mashiach, Messiah, the one of a kind, that God would not allow him to build the Beit HaMikdash, because if he had built the Beit HaMikdash, God would have felt that God, never could allow the Beit HaMikdash to be destroyed. And it was somewhere in God's greater plan that there would be Babylonians and later Romans, and he would not, according to that rabbinic opinion, the Babylonians and Romans wouldn't be able to do their thing if David had built the Beit HaMikdash. So regardless, Hiram was sending him wood and stones to build other things in Yerushalayim. You know, it's been under the Yebusi, and now you're making it into a quote-unquote modern city and a gorgeous city, and I'm giving you the nicest wood, and I'm giving you the nicest stones, and I'm giving you the pros who know how to craft it. So we learned that, and the question was asked in the chat, why was Hiram so good? We're not used to people being that good, especially for nothing. Last 2,000 years, 3,000 years of Jewish history, you don't really have a lot of people that are so friendly. They normally race to the door, who could be the first anti-Semite in the room? And so I was asked, what's the deal with Hiram? Was he like a Noahide, a non-Jew who lived by the 7 mitzvot, or like, what's the deal with Hiram? So we'll learn about that also. And then finally, there was a little bit at the very end that David went on to marry a whole bunch of new wives, additional wives. He already had several wives. We learned about his first 6 wives, and we also added Michal, the daughter of Shaul, to that tally that we read earlier. So he had 7 wives and kids, and now he marries more wives. So the question is, what's that all about? And whatever we cannot reach today, God willing, we'll get to next time. Today also, if you're on the East Coast or even Central Time, it's now Yom Yerushalayim, certainly in Eretz Israel. It's now Jerusalem Day, marking the 56th anniversary of the day that the Israel Defense Forces, Tzahal, liberated the rest of Jerusalem. They already had half of Jerusalem. I don't like to call it East Jerusalem, because that implies, you know, there's like East Berlin, West Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina. There's Jerusalem. And Israel reunited the eastern half of Jerusalem. That was 1967. And we marked the 56th anniversary. And amid all the aggravation that comes up ever since Shabbat Shmini Atzeret of October 7, and all that, it's okay to celebrate. There's something in the Jewish DNA that we almost don't feel comfortable being happy. It's like the first word out of, I think, a baby's mouth is oi. And there's a sense of, don't look so happy because there's some anti-Semite that'll get jealous. Or don't feel so happy because it won't last too long. It's important to feel happy. Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha. We should serve God with happiness and we should enjoy. And it's a time to celebrate. And so we begin our class and our Yom Yerushalayim class. Thank you so much for being here. I apologize as always if there are those little squares, those little black squares on the screen. There's a whole thing behind that, and that's for another time. Before we get rolling, let me quickly put a final note on the question of the Jewish connection to Cedars Sinai Hospital. Don't want to leave anything untouched and I like to knot all the knots. I had mentioned that Cedars Sinai is a Jewish hospital. And I commented on the name Cedars Sinai that, like here in Orange County, they have Hoag Presbyterian Hospital. They're out and out Presbyterian. And there's Saint this and Saint that. In Orange County, there's Saint Joseph's. In New York, there's Saint Luke. And there's Columbia Presbyterian. But like Jews, when Jews have hospitals, they don't call it Jew Hospital. They do have two of them at least. In Louisville, Kentucky, they have Jews Hospital, I think it's called. And also in Jersey City, New Jersey, they have like Jews Hospital. But that might be because the other big hospital is called Christ Hospital. In New York, they called it Mount Sinai. Like, you get it? Wink, wink. Don't let anyone know, but that means Jewish, because we were at Mount Sinai. And I mentioned likewise Cedars Sinai. And then some of you pointed out, actually, Rabbi, they didn't call it Cedars. It's not like the Jews founded Cedars Sinai. There was a Cedars Hospital and there was a Sinai Hospital. So let's very quickly, and then we get to Tachlis. There was something called the Cedars of Lebanon Hospital. Again, it wasn't built with Lebanese money. It's not like there's this rich, powerful Lebanese community in LA. It was Jewish money, but they didn't want to call too much attention. So they called it Cedars of Lebanon. Get it? Lebanon, Cedars. That's how the Holy Temple was built in Jerusalem. The Holy Temple, that's Jews. Get it? Cedars of Lebanon, Jewish hospital. Mount Sinai. Get it? Jews were at Mount Sinai. It was founded by Jewish businessman Casper Cohn. Cedars of Lebanon was established originally as the Casper Cohn Hospital in 1902. Eventually, the first Jewish female doctor in LA acted as the superintendent, Sarah Ichvesen. And then later on, Cedars of Lebanon Hospital got its name beyond Casper Cohn, named after the religiously significant Lebanon cedars tree, which was highly sought after and used to build King Solomon's temple. Okay. Mount Sinai Hospital. In 1918, Bikur Cholim Society opened a hospice. It was the time of the great influenza panic. And later on, they moved it over to another place. It was a Bikur Cholim, and then it was renamed Mount Sinai Hospital. From Bikur Cholim, it's hard to pronounce the ch, to Mount Sinai Hospital. And so you ended up with Mount Sinai became a 50-bed facility, yada, yada, yada. And then eventually some couple named Levine ended up putting up money. And as a result, Cedars of Lebanon merged with Mount Sinai. And somehow they all figured out everybody's Jewish here. And the money, the big money that made it possible was the money from Max Factor family. And the Factor family is a very Jewish family. They're well known, not as Jews, but they put the money up there. Today, Cedars Sinai Hospital, which is where Janet Halpert got born, and where I got my lung transplant. Today, Cedars Sinai is a hospital that very proudly has a big Jewish star on the front. And they have names like Steven Spielberg, hint, get it? Spielberg, get it? And they also have mezuzahs on every door. And I don't even think they have that in Mount Sinai. Either the Mount Sinai or the hospital in New York. There's a mezuzah on every door, just like some of the Christian Catholic hospitals have a cross on every, like right over every pillow, if you remember. I've never been to the Catholic hospital for that, but I remember the scene in The Frisco Kid with Gene Wilder when he wakes up after the encounter with the monks, the silent monks. So anyway, that's to just not that tie. You had Jews behind those two hospitals. And we got started because we were talking about Hiram and the cedars of Lebanon, which brings us back to what we're here for, which is to learn Tanakh and Torah. So let's do that. Oh, I'm sorry, I meant to get that off the screen and to put the Navi on the screen. Let me just figure out which square that's going to be. That's going to be maybe this one. Okay, good. That should work. Let me get this out of the way. Every time I go from me to the screen, a floating thing comes up that I have to get off the screen. That's what causes those black horizontals temporarily. So we begin. So we were learning that all these sages came and they made a covenant with David. He's the king. We talked about that he was 30 years old when he began reigning, and he reigned for 40 years. We talked about 7 years in Hebron and 33 in Yerushalayim. And the Yebusi, the Jebusites, still were there. Vayomer, it should be Vayomru, but there's a reason it's singular. And they told David, LaDavid, Lo tavohena, ki im hesircha ha'ivrim v'habischim, you're not coming in here unless you're able to clear out every last lame and blind and lame person. Lemor, in other words, what they were saying, Lo yavo David hena, David ain't coming in here. Well, he did come in there. Va'elko David at Metzudat Tzion, he ir David. David captured the stronghold of Tzion, the city of David. It is now called the city of David. And he put out the word to all of his men, his soldiers. I pretty much am challenging, asking for a volunteer to lead the way to wipe out the Yebusi, the Jebusites, and clear out the city. And by golly, they dared me, they dared us. So by golly, we also shall clear out all the blind and lame Jebusites. And we will not have Jebusites, lame and blind Jebusites in the city. That's their dare, and that's our response. Unconditional surrender. Vayeshev David b'Metzudah yikra la'ir David. And so David took control of the fortress of Jerusalem and the city of David. And he became greater and greater. Vayelech David haloch v'gadol. And then we learned about Hiram, the king of Tzor, who sent Atzei Arazim, cedars from Lebanon, and carpenters, and Chorshei Evan Kir, and stonemasons. And you've seen, although the western wall in Yerushalayim was not necessarily one of those things built by King Hiram's stonemasons, it's that idea of building great fortresses and sculptures in the old days with stones. I'm giving an example of a structure in Israel and Jerusalem that you all have seen either in person or in video, of how stones, gigantic stones with the right kind of stonemasons who know how to shape them, could be built into serious structures. And so David knew that God wanted him as king, and so on and so forth. I don't know if you recognize this guy with a beard.
This is Michael Douglas.
Let's make it a little louder.
And I am here with my son Dylan. My name is Michael Douglas, and I am here with my son Dylan.
You know Michael Douglas from movies and television, son of Kirk Douglas.
My son Dylan, who just celebrated his bar mitzvah. It's our first day in Jerusalem, and we're at the city of David. that has left such an incredible impression on us. It's been a wonderful, wonderful history lesson, a wonderful lesson of the history of Israel, and we are grateful to all the fantastic work that all the archaeologists and all the people here in Israel are doing on bringing this ancient city of David back to life. So we're continuing and looking forward to a wonderful, wonderful visit. Shalom.
That moved me as I was looking at it. It brings home what we have, and archaeology is proving it's true.
Important site in the world.
Okay.
I'm Franny. I'm a tour guide, and one of my favorite places is here. The most amazing discovery of ancient Jerusalem. The lost city of Jerusalem has been found, and it's being excavated now for the world to see. I'm going to be joined by Doron Spielman, Vice President of the City of David. So follow me.
I'm just doing this from home. I don't want to do it.
Hey, Doron.
Hi, Franny.
How you doing?
I'm good. Nice to see you.
It's wonderful to be here.
It's a beautiful day,
Yeah.
but one thing's missing.
Yes, totally. You guys.
Yeah, all the people.
We really miss y'all. So come with us, and let's go in.
Let's do it.
All right.
You'll notice the harp. The harp is to King Saul.
So Doron, here we are sitting in this beautiful garden outside the wall.
Temple Mount behind us, Franny, and even the original gate to the Temple Mount is right here. You can see the actual stairs that went into the temple. They see the temple, they see this area of land, and Weitzman and Eliezer ben Yehuda go to Baron Rothschild and they say, listen, we have to excavate this area of land. This is the archaeological connection between the Jewish people and Jerusalem. Rothschild falls in love with the project, and he says, I've got something better. I'm gonna buy this land. 1921, Baron Rothschild comes and buys 75% of the hilltop you and I are standing on now with deeds. We actually have those original deeds. He purchases this land outright for archaeological excavation and for the future state of Israel.
And actually, I've heard that this project that Rothschild did was actually almost like a project of the Jewish people. There were communities all over the world that were raising money to try and be part of this project.
You are so right. Just a few days ago, somebody actually recalled the story that he remembers his family in Russia, in their shtetl in Russia, their little community. The children would gather kopecks, small little bit of Russian currency, and bring them to their local synagogue and deposit them in a tzedakah box, a little charity box. And that money was sent to Israel to join Rothschild's efforts of buying land. And so the city of David was really a project of the Jewish people, as was buying land in Israel, and especially, of course, in Jerusalem.
If anybody's interested in knowing more about that, I'll be glad if you email me later. I'll send you the link. I do want to get to more of our material as well. So we continue. We were learning about King Hiram, and I was asked, why was he so friendly? Why was he so righteous? And sending all the cedars for 2 generations, David and then to Shlomo and all these carpenters and everything. Well, look, don't look a gift horse in the mouth, and accept friendship and alliance wherever it can be found, and thank God for it. But there is a little bit more to it. First, what we just learned. Vayishlach Hiram el Tzorat avadav el Shlomo. Not only did he do this for David, but in Malachim Aleph, the next volume of the early prophets, the Nevi'im Rishonim, after Shmuel Bet, 2 Samuel, in 1 Kings Malachim Aleph, chapter 5, you have the continuing second generation after the passing of David, and Hiram sends servants to Shlomo. So he's not only sending cedars, he's not only sending stones and stone masons, he's sending a whole bunch of people. When he heard the word that David had passed and that his son Shlomo had been anointed the new king, Hiram had loved or had been allied with David all his life and wanted to continue that relationship. It's something like the bond between the United States and the United Kingdom after we got past that little King George III period. Whenever we run into issues, or more like when they run into issues, World War I, so they turn to America and they talk about, our common language, our common history. They paper over the War of 1812 and some of the stuff in the 1776 revolution. And truly, we do have Americans a common heritage and history. We certainly do. We've gotten over some of the bad stuff, and we grew up and made friends. So Hiram is saying, we've had a great relationship till now, and I want to build on and continue what we had. Ataya data David Avdi, says Shlomo. Shlomo says, you knew about my dad. God would not allow him to build the holy temple, the Shem Hashem Elokav, because of wars that encircled him. As I taught you earlier tonight, his hands had shed blood, albeit righteously so. And so there were these wars until we now have peace. God has given our enemies to us under the soles of his feet, our feet, and we are at peace now, and Shlomo will not have to shed blood. And therefore, unbelievable, like Pax Romana, Ata Heniach Hashem Elokai li misaviv, Shlomo says to Hiram, God has given us the equivalent of world peace. Ein Satan ve'ein pegara. There's not a single opponent or adversary that bothers us or threatens us. And therefore, I've got clearance from God to build the holy temple. V'hineni omer livnot bait l'shem Hashem Elokai. Ka'asher diber Hashem el David avi lemor. So I've got the clearance, just as God had said, Bincha, asher aten tachtecha al kisecha v'yivneh bait l'shmi. God had said that you're going to have a son, and that son will have your throne after you, and he will build a house. So therefore, ata, again with an ayin, now, savev yichatu li arazim il havanon, please go ahead and let's covenant and cut down those more cedars from Lebanon. And I will send you manpower. I will send you my own servants up to Tyre, Tyre, in Lebanon, and they'll join with your servants. And on top of it, I'll pay salaries for all your servants. I'm not asking you, as part of our alliance and friendship, to send me stuff for free. We'll pay for all of it. You just name their salaries and we'll pay. Because, as you know, I would like to pay you guys for the work, because there's no one in the world who knows how to cut and craft and do carpentry with cedar trees the way you Lebanese can. Sidonim, you people from Sidon, Sidon, both those cities, Tyre and Sidon. If you look today on any map, there's still cities in Lebanon, just as Israel still has cities with names like Yerushalayim, Beit Lechem, Hebron, Shiloh, Be'er Sheva. So in the same way, Tyre and Sidon still exist. And so I'll send you my men. I'll pay my men. Don't worry about that. And I'll pay your men. You just name the price. And when Hiram heard that, Vayismach Ma'od, he was thrilled. Vayoma Baruch Hashem Hayom. He praises the God of Israel. Blessed is the God, Hashem. The text could have said Elokim to make it as though he's just like a secular non-Jewish leader saying, thank God. He specifically is referring to the God of Israel. Blessed is the God of Israel, Hayom, today, Asher Natan LeDavid ben Chacham, Ahlam Harav Hazeh, who gave my dear friend David an exceptionally brilliant, wise son to rule over this nation. And if you'll say, I can't even believe that a secular non-Jewish leader of a non-Jewish country would be praising the God of Israel, wow. I can only refer you to about 2 months ago in our Sunday morning class when I brought you clips of the new president, Milei from Argentina. And there he was at the Lubavitcher Rebbe's grave, and there he was at the Kotel praising rabbis and Shabbat, and he's talking about becoming Jewish after he serves as president of Argentina. Vayishlach Hiram el Shlomo lemor, Shemati et asher shalachta elai, ani aseh kol cheftecha, batzeres and vatzev roshim. And so, make a long story short, Hiram says, I'll send you the trees, and I'll send you the men, and you'll do everything we want to talk about. And how am I going to get all those trees to you? I'm smart also. I'm going to take all those cedars of Lebanon trees, and I'm going to tie them into rafts, and we'll just float them down. After all, your land exists from the river to the sea. So, from the river to the sea, cedars will be coming from Lebanon. And you just tell me where we should deliver them, and we'll break them into manageable sizes so that when they land on dry terra firma, you can roll it over to wherever you want. Jerusalem, fine. And so he did it. And he sent all kinds of stuff. And meantime, and this is the idea that he's not just a Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, Noahide guy. There was a commercial arrangement here. Solomon, Shlomo delivered to him 20,000 cores of wheat as provisions for his household, and oil. That is to say, that's makolet leveto. In other words, there was payment, significant. At that time, Israel was like the world's breadbasket, just as you learned in high school about Egypt having been the world's breadbasket. Just as America, in many ways, now is the world's bread. Israel, at that time, was the breadbasket of the Middle East. It was an extraordinary period. We'll learn about it when we get to Melachim Aleph and First Kings. So you do this, and I will send you wheat, and I will send you oil, and we'll take care of you. And there was a friendship between them, and they made a treaty. And he imposed forced labor, Shlomo, on Israel. He imposed very, very heavy taxes on Israel to pay for this. And there was a mixed feeling about, do we like this? No one likes to pay taxes, but there was a national feeling we are the strongest, at that moment in time, country in the world, militarily, financially, and we're now about to actualize the great grand vision of building a house of God in Jerusalem. I mean, this was the promise going back through the years in the desert and through Yehoshua and the Shoftim, and one day God will have his house. We will, and so there was that sense of no one wants to be taxed, but it's a chance, it's an opportunity through all of history for the opportunity to have a hand in building the Beit HaMikdash, just as you saw in the clip I played earlier. In the more modern era, Jews wanting to contribute. I mean, what, Rothschild did not have enough money? Rothschild could buy it on his own. But people wanted a chelik. They wanted a portion in buying part of Jerusalem. And if Rothschild was making it possible, that made it all the more possible for everyone else to participate and partake. And to their dying days, they could tell their children and grandchildren at the Seder, you know, your Zaidi had a part in acquiring Yerushalayim for the Jewish people. So there was a mas, a heavy tax, both monetarily and physically. People were conscripted, drafted physically. 30,000 men were conscripted by Shlomo into an army, essentially, to build the Beit HaMikdash. He didn't need a military army. And they came in shifts of 10,000 a month. And he also had all other kinds of, he had quarriers in the hills getting marble, slate, and he had porters whose job was to carry and schlep everything. And he needed 3,300 officials just to be in charge, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's the first thing about Hiram I wanted to share beyond his relationship with David. But it continues in Kings 9. In chapter 9 of Melachim Aleph, we learn in Pasuk Yud, Vayehi mitzvei esrim shana asher bana Shlomo et shnei habatim. And now 20 years have passed. Hiram, by the way, helped Shlomo build the Beit HaMikdash and a palace, just as he helped David build a palace. And so Beit Hashem, Beit HaMelech. He built a house for God and a house for king. Now, 20 years later, Hiram melech Tzor nisad Shlomo ba'atzei arazim uvatzei roshim uvazahav l'chochev tzo. And so now it's 20 years later, since the time King Hiram had given all of this, and Shlomo in turn gave Hiram 20 towns in the region of Galilee, and that's a big discussion. No way can we get into it now. God willing, we will when we get to chapter 9 of Melachim Aleph. But he actually offered 20 towns in the Galil, part of the land of Israel, to Lebanon. And when we think nowadays about Ariel Sharon gave Gaza over, and we know what that led to, Hamas, and Ehud Barak gave up southern Lebanon, and we know what that led to, Hezbollah, and Yitzchak Rabin gave up part of Judea, Samaria to Arafat and Fatah. I mean, the idea of giving, and we've learned about you're not supposed to give up land Thursday nights, and the rabbis talk about it. He may have overdone it. It's sort of, sometimes we were just learning that in an earlier class. Sometimes a person, we were learning last week about King Uzziah, as an aside to answer that question about whether there could be an abdication of a Jewish king. And we were learning about how Uzziah had everything, and then he overstepped, and he suddenly wanted, though he's not a Kohen, to offer a sacrifice to the Beit HaMikdash. We learned about that. So rightly or wrongly, he offered some towns in the Galil. But it says that Lo Yashru Be'einav, when Hiram saw those towns, he didn't like them. He wasn't offered Malibu and Beverly Hills. Vayomer Meharim Ha'ela, Asher Natata Li Achi, my dear brother. Oh, my dear brother, what are you giving me? Give me a break. So that was another discussion. But meanwhile, however, he accepted what he was given, and he sent Shlomo 120 talents. So what was going on is that they had a commercial relationship. And then in Divrei Hayam Bet, 2 Chronicles chapter 8, it really all comes together. First, it mentions the same thing I just read you, about how after 20 years, they went into more working together. And Hiram gave him some cities also. It says Huram in English and Hebrew, but it's reference to Hiram actually. And so Hiram gave him some land, and Shlomo settled Jews there, and so on and so forth and so forth and so on. And it talks about how they engaged in commerce together. And it says that, for example, they went as far as the Red Sea. At the time, Shlomo went to Etzion Gever and to Elot on the sea coast of the land of Edom. That's like the Sea of Reeds, the Red Sea. And even that far, that's how, number one, how magnificent and grand the power and suzerainty of the land of Israel was in those days. But beyond that, Vayishlach lo Huram, again it's Hiram, Biad Avadav Aniyot, and Hiram sent ships to Shlomo for a common commerce to take advantage of sort of their common control of the Red Sea. But Avadim Yode'eyam, Hiram sent servants who knew, like sailors, like Navy or merchant marine, who knew the waters and how to conduct commerce. Vayavoim avdei Shlomo afira bechusham arba me'ot v'chamishim kikar zav vayaviu el melech Shlomo. So the point I'm bringing home here is that Hiram was motivated by kindness, by generosity, and he saw a good opportunity. It's like when they talk about, why did these Arab countries get into the Abraham Accords? So is it that they suddenly woke up and decided, you know, I, the king of United Arab Emirates, I just happened to spend a week in the Catskills, and I heard some Jewish comedians. They're really funny. I want to make a covenant with these people. They're really good. We Arabs don't have a sense of humor. You tell them a joke, and the guy responds by bombing his house. We need some of these kibitzers. Is that why they entered the David Accord, the Abraham Accords? They entered the Abraham Accords because of mutuality, not immediately only to make money, Most of those Arab countries have money, though people with money always want more money, but they're afraid of Iran. Iran are Shiites, and they all tend to be, all the Arab countries that joined the Abraham Accords are Sunni. And Shiites, after they kill the Jews, next on the agenda is to kill the Sunni Muslims. And therefore, it wasn't only out of love and friendship, but they had strategic reasons for making suddenly a beautiful alliance. All these countries, one after another, Bahrain and all of these guys, common interests. And yes, on top of that, there are commercial interests. Israel invents things that the Arabs can use, and the Arabs have so much, like countries like the United Arab Emirates, they're very successful, and it's a chance to be more successful. Israel has medical advances that they might not have in some of these Arab countries. So it's the same thing with Hiram. Let's continue. Now, it brings us to the next discussion. And this discussion, very important discussion. I learned this with our Thursday night class in a different context, but now I share it with you, so I'm going to be a lot more quick for two reasons. Number one, for those who come to the Thursday night class, I don't want to bore you with a thorough repetition of what we learned. And for those that, even for the other purpose, I want to make the point without going as deeply. So let me just explain it very quickly. In Bereshit chapter 20, Perek Chaf, Abraham was traveling at a time of famine with his wife Sarah, and they loved each other, and they were together, and they were in Gerar, part of the Philistine Gaza Strip area. And as they got there, they became circumspect and cautious because it's like a crazy world. It was known that there was a morality among the Gerar people, the Gazans. They had a morality that you could not commit adultery. You're not allowed to be physically intimate with a married woman, but a little bit different from the Jewish way of looking at it. Their solution was, so you kill the husband, and then she's no longer a married woman, and then you could be intimate. So Abraham and Sarah were afraid that now that they're in Gerar, she apparently, according to the Torah, was extraordinarily beautiful, really like the top 1 or 2% beautiful. And so there was a fear they're going to kill Abraham in order to bring her to the king. So the strategy Abraham came up with Sarah was, we're going to tell them if they ask, I'm your brother. So they don't have to kill me. They're going to take you one way or the other if they come to take you. So at least let me be free on the outside and figure out what I can do rather than get killed. So they came and they said, Avram's the brother, and they grabbed Sarah and brought her to King Avimelech. And the Torah tells us that that night, Avimelech intended to be physically intimate with Sarah. God came to him in an exceptionally vivid dream, so unique that he knew that God was talking to him. It wasn't just a dream where you wake up and you say, boy, that was strange. He knew God was talking to him. And the dream that he got from God is that God would slay him dead and his household, the whole palace, if he lays a finger on Sarah. And he says to God in this dream, but I never touched her. I'm innocent. I didn't know she's married. And God says in the dream, I know that. I know that you're innocent to the degree that a guy is innocent seizing a woman. I know you're innocent. And that is why I miraculously made it so that you did not touch her tonight. Whether he expected he was going to be involved, maybe he didn't have a mood, or maybe he had a stomach ache, I don't know. But that God made it that he did not actually sin with Sarah. And therefore, God said, I'm sparing your life, but you better make things right with Abraham, her husband, because he's a prophet and only his prayers will save your life. So the text tells us in Bereshit that Avimelech goes to Abraham, and Avimelech explains what he told God in the dream. I had no idea. And I think it was really crummy of you to misrepresent your relationship. If I knew you were the husband, So anyway, Abraham explains why he did so. And then Avimelech says, now that we've got this straightened out, first of all, I'm giving you all the gold in the world and all the sheep and all the cows and all the cattle and all of the male and female servants. I'm going to make you like the richest of people. And that's how overnight HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God, made Abraham from a average income guy, a shepherd who wasn't particularly rich or poor, overnight into one of the richest people in the world. That was part of the miracle. And then the second part, Ba'ata with an ayin, Hishava li ve'elokim heina, im tishkorli ulenini lunechti, yikach chesed asher asiti imcha ta'aseh imadi v'im ha'aretz asher garta ba. Avimelech says to Abraham as follows, now that we've worked it all out, and I've made her rich, and I never touched her, and God said, really, I just need to ask you to pray for me. Let's make a covenant that I will not hurt you or your sons or your grandsons or your great-grandsons 4 generations, and promise me that you will not interfere with my sons and grandsons and great-grandsons, and let us be sovereign here for 4 generations. And Abraham said, okay, Anochi Shavea, I swear it. And so he made the vow that he, Abraham, on behalf of his sons, Yitzchak, not to mention Yishmael, and his grandson, Yaakov, not to mention Esav, and his great-grandsons, the 12 tribes of Israel, and so on and so forth, that his generations would not uproot the Philistines of Gerar from the land. And we learned on a previous Thursday night class that because of that, God punished Abraham with the Akedah. God essentially said, oh, I gave you an extraordinary gift, the land of Israel, and you nonchalantly are just trading it away and giving it over to someone else, regifting. Well, I will have you regift your son Yitzchak, my other gift to you. I'll have you regift that gift to me. And Rashbam, we learned it together on Thursday night, explained how that was why there was an Akedah, why God compelled Abraham to bring his son up to the mountain of Zion, Mount Moriah, and go through that process of almost having to sacrifice Yitzchak before sending an angel who said, don't lay not your hand on your son, on the land. They stopped it. So we learned that in a different context Thursday night, that it is forbidden to give up the land of Israel. It's just forbidden. So here Avram took sheep and oxen, gave them to Avimelech, and the two of them made a brit, a covenant. And that's what it will be for all time to come. That for these 4 generations and whatnot, we will not displace you from the land of Israel. It turns out, and we did not get into it last week because of time and the nature of how much I can cover in one class, it turns out that as among the 7 Canaanite nations, Gerar, those of the Canaanites who lived in Gerar were the Jebusites. You had Emori, the Amorites, and the Hittites, and the Hivites, and the Perizzites. Then the Canaanite nation, whom God said to Moshe Rabbeinu and the nation in the desert, and Yoshua, you have to drive them out of the land of Israel. One of those 7 was the Yebusi, and they were in Gerar. And according to the rabbis, the Jews were stuck. The Jews didn't know what to do. We're supposed to get rid of them. But our forefather, our founding forefather, the initial patriarch and founder of Judaism, made a long-term oath that we're not allowed to dispossess them from the land. So we don't know what to do with them. And so they continued to be sovereign over the city of Yevus. They are the Yevusim. The city was called Yevus. English King James transliteration, the Jebusites, and their city was Jebus. And David, when he became king of Israel and rose to that place, said, it is long time over to displace the Jebusites. Abraham made a 4-generation vow, and without getting into whether it was a good vow, bad vow, whether he had authority, it was 4 generations. Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and the tribes. And even if you want to say the generation after the tribes, and that was the end of it. Meanwhile, all these subsequent generations of judges, Yiftach, Shimshon, Devorah, Gidon, you had all these judges, and you had Shaul. The contract expired by the terms of the contract. And so, since no one else has acted on it, I'm now ready to clean out that last part of Eretz Israel that needs to be cleaned out. And that's the place that God wants to be set up as the place of his home. So I'm now coming to clean out Jerusalem. And that's what prompted him. And that's why suddenly now he decides it's time. It's time to clear out the Yevusi. So the rabbis and the commentators talk about it. Let's take a look at some of the commentators, because we'll find out more. First of all, we're going to find out, let me just summarize it. What's the deal with the blind and the lame? According to the rabbis, the Yevusim, the Jebusites, they're Canaanites, they were idolaters, they built statues, they worshiped statues. For their protection, realizing that the reason they alone among the other Canaanite tribes had managed to survive and continued living in safety was by virtue of Abraham and the pledge he made on behalf of his son and his grandsons. They built 3 monuments to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. In the United States, we built monuments to Abraham Lincoln, George Washington. There's 3 different monuments identical to Andrew Jackson. One in Jackson Square in New Orleans, and one in Washington, D.C., and one at the state capitol in Nashville. I was at all 3. We built monuments to people. And so they built monuments to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And here's how they did it. How can you tell the difference? There were no photographs, and they didn't have some Michelangelo with some kind of genius idea of let's have this one with horns and let's have this one not dressed. What they did was to symbolize Yitzchak. That monument was a man that was depicted as blind, as having no eyes, because they knew there was something in Jewish history, in the annals of the Jewish people, that Yitzchak, at the end of his life, lost the power of his vision. And that's why the famous account of how when he was giving his bracha, and he was going to give it to Esav, and then Rivka had Yaakov go and make those wool gloves and put it around his neck, and Yitzchak couldn't really see. Hakol kol Yaakov by Yadayim Yadei Esav. The voice is the voice of Jacob, the hands are the hands of Esav, and he couldn't see because he had lost his vision. So one monument represented a blind man, and the monument representing Yaakov was done in a way to represent someone who is lame. I don't know how they did that. Did they cut off one leg of the monument, or did they do something curious with the leg? But it was known to them that in the course of Yaakov's life, he was made semi-lame. You'll remember the night before his confrontation with Esav, his brother, as he was returning from 20 years with Lavan, his father-in-law and uncle. And so he was bringing his wives and his children, and everybody were going through on the way from Haran back to the land of Israel. And as they passed the area, Esav came with 400 soldiers. And you may recall, Yaakov was terrified, the pending confrontation. And the night before that confrontation, God sent an angel. And that angel wrestled with Yaakov all night, if you recall. That's why his name was changed from Yaakov to Yisrael, from Jacob to Israel. He who wrestled with God. And the Torah tells us that in the all night of wrestling, the angel did manage to give him a blow to his leg that left him for the rest of his life debilitated in his walking. Not completely lame, but debilitated in his walking. And for that reason, even before the laws of kashrut came down from Mount Sinai, it already had become a thing that we're not allowed to eat gid hanasha. That particular portion of the animal, even before the laws of kashrut and slaughtering with shchita and which animals are kosher and which animals are not kosher, we're not allowed to eat the gid hanasha because that's the section of Yaakov's leg that had been crippled. And so the Midrash and the rabbis teach that one of the statues built by the Yevusim represented Yitzchak, blindness, one Yaakov represented by lameness, and the third one, or the first one, Avraham, they actually wrote on some parchment the words of the covenant that I read you from the Chumash. The words of the covenant between Avraham and Avimelech. And they put that in the mouth of the statue as an everlasting remembrance and documentation that we have this covenant. It's like if you go to the National Archives in Washington, they have under a glass case an original of the Declaration of Independence, and another original of the Constitution, and another original of the Bill of Rights, under 3 glass cases. In the same way, this became and Britain has preserved the Magna Carta. In the same way, they preserved that. So with that, we can better follow the stream of the commentators. Here we go. Rashi on Parakeh, Pasuk Vav, where the Jebusites is saying, you'll never get us out of here, and you'll never get out the blind and the lame. Now it's starting to fit in. The fortress of Tzion was called Yevus. Its inhabitants were from the descendants of Avimelech, that king of Gerar. They had 2 idols, one depicting a blind person and one depicting a lame person. They were made to represent Yitzchak and Yaakov. Placed in their mouths was the oath Abraham swore to Avimelech. This is why they were not displaced from Tzion, whereas the other tribes, nations of the Canaanites were. When Yerushalayim was conquered, the tribe of Yehuda did not conquer the fortress of Tzion, as it initially says in the book of Joshua. However, the Yevusim who lived in Yerushalayim, the descendants of Yehuda, were unable to expel them. It talks about that they weren't able. Rav Yehoshua ben Levi says they had the ability to expel them, but they felt they were not permitted to. We continue. This is the Malbim. Malbim talks about this as well. And he says, I don't want to go through it for time reasons. I don't want to go through all of it. We already explained that the children of Yehuda conquered their portion of Yerushalayim, while the children of Binyamin did not. And that is where the Jebusites dwelled. And the king and his men went to drive out the Jebusites from the portion of Benjamin, who spoke to David saying, you're not going to come here. All right. In order to understand the plain meaning of the verse, the words of Rabbi Ralbag are sweetest to me, to the Malbim. Rabbi Ralbag said that the Jebusites placed statues in the form of the blind and the lame at the gates, which were made in such a fashion that they swung extremely heavy iron rods. If you push the gate, an extremely heavy iron rod would go rotating and could kill a person. Thus, no one was able to approach the gates because these statues would, quote unquote, strike them down with their powerful motions. And it's possible that actual blind and lame people stood beneath them to help the rods move, who knows. The statues were close enough to the drainage channel that when it poured out water, its flow caused the statues and the rods to move just like a water mill, etc., etc. So he goes on and he talks about it. And they erected a line of statues in the form of blind people, and after this, a line of statues in the form of lame people, and after this, a drain pipe. And so at first, David wanted to go in through the gates. And they said, you shall not come here unless you remove the blind and the lame, meaning it's impossible to get into our city unless you figure out how you're going to get rid of those blind and lame statues and people driving the metal rods. And so that's what's meant by you shall not come here. That basically the blind and lame are going to be keeping you from coming in. They made their idols from wheels and hinges, able to move and lift heavy things. And thus they deceived the foolish masses into believing they were gods. Let's continue this. This is the Radak. So Radak talks about this finally, likewise. Yonatan translates this phrase as unless you remove the sinners and the wicked who say that David will not come here. All right. But we find in the rabbinic literature that the men of Yevus said to Avraham, make a covenant with us that your descendants will not inherit the city of Yevus, what became Jerusalem. And it doesn't say this in Breshit in the Chumash, but it's part of the tradition that part of that covenant was, if you give us Yevus and leave us alone, we also are dominant over nearby Hebron in the greater land of Israel. They're kind of near each other. Let's take a quick look and just refresh our memory really quick here. I'm just trying to remember which of those tags to come back. Okay. Remember, here's Jerusalem and here's Hebron. And in the greater scheme of things, as among 12 tribes, they were sovereign over both. Okay. So what they were saying is, Avraham was given Machpelah, the cave, which later was used to bury Sarah, and of course all our patriarchs and matriarchs, except for Rachel, who's buried in Bethlehem. And that was the deal. He did so, and the men of Yevus made bronze idols upon which they wrote the oath and placed in the city square. When Israel came into the land under Joshua, they were unable to enter the city because of the oath. And we just read that pasuk a few moments ago. When David became king, he wanted to enter there, but they did not allow him. As we just learned, they said, you shall not come here. Whereas David's mind was, the oath is expired. It was for 4 generations. It's way, way beyond that. They said to him, you're not able to enter until you remove these idols upon which the oath and covenant are written. Unless you remove the blind and the lame. And that's how this is to be understood, which are the idols that have eyes but cannot see, ears cannot hear, yada, 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 legs that cannot walk. Those which David's soul loathes. He loathes idolatry and idols, and he hates to hear of them. And so they say, the blind and lame shall not come into the house. David said to his men, whoever goes up first and removes these idols will become my chief officer going forward. And Yoav, about whom we've learned plenty, and he's the one who murdered Avner ben Ner, and already was sort of the chief of staff, but only the chief of the Yehuda army, right? They weren't yet a kingdom of 12 tribes. So he was sort of like a general in charge of one tribe, but he was not yet the general in charge of all of Israel. Like, I don't know, in the Civil War, there were a lot of generals among the Northern, among the Union, but only one chief general. First there was Winfield Scott, then there was George McClellan, and there was Pope, and there was Joe Hooker, and eventually, after Meade, they finally settled on U.S. Grant. Meantime, it's not like you have only one general in an army. So Yoav, until then, only was the general over Yehuda. This was the moment that he earned for himself to be the general over the entire nation. David said, who will lead and remove those idols, which apparently were perilous, as we just learned with those iron rods, and that person will be the chief officer. And so Yoav did it. Afterward, David purchased the city of Yebus on behalf of everybody, sort of like what Rothschild did, with gold and an eternal deed as an everlasting possession. And we won't read it right now, but later on in the book of Chronicles, it explains, it shows that's where that happened. As far as the idols, one was blind in reference to Yitzchak, and the other lame in reference to Yaakov. And the mouth was the oath which Avram swore to Avimelech, and so on and so forth. Therefore, Israel did not conquer it when they conquered Yerushalayim originally, because the grandson of Avimelech was still alive. That was the time of Joshua. But in the days of David, he'd already died. The oath was nullified. And so Ibn Ezra explains at that point that it no longer applied. It was fine to knock them out. And therefore, the text tells us further that, first of all, here's the verse where David, I just quoted you from Divrei Yamim Aleph, 1 Chronicles chapter 11, verse 6, Parak Yud Aleph, Pasuk Vav. Vayomer David kol makei Yevusi barishona yel rosh l'sar. When David's armies were here at chapter 5 that we're learning at the entrance of Jerusalem, and he's looking for someone to lead the battle. Vayal barishona Yoav ben Suriah vayhi l'rosh. Yoav, he's the one who took the lead, attacked first, and thereupon became the chief. The last midrash for tonight, because only of time, I really, once I get started with it, I really get into this. And I know you do have other things on pleb. So let's just do this one last thing. Let me just, okay. Rashi explained, is it Rashi? Let me just take Metzudat David. Metzudat David explains, in answer to a question that we haven't asked, what did he have against blind and lame people? It says at the end of the verse, V'et ha'pischim v'et ha'ivrim sinuei nefesh David, and the lame and blind who were hateful to David. What did he have against blind and lame people? And so he brings out that David's issue with the blind and lame, Laman Yehei hadavar l'zikaron. This is Metzudat David on chapter 5, Pasuk 8, Pasuk Ches. The third Davra Maschil, that is the third commentary on that verse 8, the one that starts with Al-Kain. So he says, Laman Yehei hadavar l'zikaron. David wanted an eternal remembrance, because he therefore issued a decree. The Jebusites dared to deny us entry to Jerusalem and dared us to clear the city of lame and blind people. I want it remembered for all time to come. That was the dare, and we met that dare. Omer laval yavo ivero piseach el habayit mibatei hayavus lefi she'amru hayavusim asher af hema yakvu biyat David latzli. So the Jebusites felt that the presence of the blind and lame would deter David from coming in. Therefore, v'lazeh hema yamdu chutza v'lo yavo el habayit. Therefore, they always shall remain, the lame and the blind shall remain outside Jerusalem's gates, that it never be forgotten that we were denied, that lame and blind people in their tragedy were used and abused and leveraged to deny us Jerusalem. And we confronted that dare, and we took it. And with that, on this Yom Yerushalayim, I close with this.
ירושלים תשכח תדבק לשוני הולך איתי אם לא אזכרכי
אוויר הרים צלול כיין וריח אורנים ניסה ברוח הארבעים עם כל פעמונים ובתרדמת אילן ואבן שבויה בחלומה העיר אשר בדד יושבת ובליבה חומה ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור אך בבואי היום לשיר לך ולך לקשור כתרים קטונתי מצעיר בנייך ומאחרון המשוררים כי שמך צורב את השפתיים כי נשיקה צרה אם אשכחך ירושלים אשר כולה זהב ירושלים.
I want to thank you all for being here. Chag Sameach, happy Yom Yerushalayim. All the rules of Omer, for those who still are following the rules of Omer in a period after Lag BaOmer, who follow the other customs, they're suspended for us on Yom Yerushalayim. It's a uniquely holy day, and many recite Hallel on this day and celebrate the miracle